We all know that UCF had talent last year, but how high can Scott Frost go with what he's got in the cupboard?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me as he does every single week, co-host of Locked On UCF, my good friend Andrew Gluchov, a.k.a. Stat Boy Drew. Andrew, on today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about 247's composite talent ranking. This is a new thing that they're doing. They're always doing something new over there at 247 that tells you how talented your team actually was with the benefit of hindsight. We're going to talk about some of that new talent that should improve UCF's composite talent ranking. And then we're going to talk about what kind of players are the best fit for Scott Frost's system here in 2025. Let's start with the talent composite rankings. UCF, per 247, was the 33rd most talented team in the country in 2024, with 81 commits that they rated. Ahead of them were the likes of Utah, what came in at 32nd. Colorado came in at 31. Arizona State came in at 30. SMU came in at 25. Going up the list here. And I mean, there's not a lot of Big 12 representation once you get into the top 10. As a matter of fact, there's no Big 12 representation when you get into the top 10. Interestingly, a BYU, according to 247, was less talented than a lot of the schools that I just listed. Let's jump into this conversation because I find this fascinating. Talent evaluation isn't an exact science. As a matter of fact, it's a very subjective business. But these rankings suggest that there were some tools in the tool shed for Gus Malzahn to use, and he went 4-8 with it. Maybe guys like, when you have the benefit of the hindsight, guys like RJ Harvey raise that composite talent ranking, right? But you made an interesting point before we started recording about where that talent was missing.
Yeah, I mean, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have a quarterback, it's really hard to do a lot. And I think UCF 2024 is a great example of what happens when you have talent around a quarterback, but the quarterback is so bad that they can't do anything with it. Now, it can work the other way around, where a good quarterback can take decent skilled players and make them better, but it doesn't really work the other way around. You know, if you've got a bad quarterback situation, there's not much you can do to make it better. I mean, the fact that RJ Harvey was there and carried the load like he did, that, triage did a little bit, but at the end of the day, that talent has to be, spread around the team. That's one of the negatives of that ranking system, is it's giving you composite numbers on the team as a whole versus like position by position and where it's important. Like you almost you're kind of hiding the dirt under the rug in a situation like that. Where you say, oh yeah, we have the 33rd most talented team, but the truth is, we don't have the talent in the right places to be competitive. Arizona State, good quarterback. Colorado, good quarterback. Look what happened to Utah. Talented team, no quarterback, and they crashed and burned. That same thing. Obviously for different reasons, their quarterbacks kept getting hurt. UCF's were just ineffective. They were just colossal busts. But the same concept remains. You have this score, but you're not really seeing the whole truth of the situation that leads to UCF having a 4-8 season.
I think what the rankings tell you is that from a composite standpoint, from an overall composite standpoint, to your point, to bolster your point, that you may be one piece away from being a more complete team if you get that, like, UCF last year with a quarterback that could throw the ball down the field, is not a 4-8 football team. I'll tell you that. There's a reason they got all the way to the 4th string quarterback just on poor play alone. So if you take Jake Retzlaff, for example, or Rocco Becht, and you put them on UCF last year, UCF is winning a lot of those games that they lost. And you won't be, with RJ Harvey at running back, you won't be able to convince me otherwise.
Oh, absolutely. And this is, where, a lot of fans kind of poo-poo John Rhys Plumlee, and unfairly. He wasn't a bad quarterback. Was he streaky at times? Sure. Did he run himself injured? Yeah. And that affected his play. But look what happened after they lost him. The grass was not greener. He graduated. Let me rephrase that. He finished his career, at UCF. There wasn't anything more he could have done. It's not like there was any animosity there. But he's gone. He's no longer playing. And look at the drop off that happened. At least there you had some consistency. You had a guy who could generate, and he really brought some the best out of Kobe Hudson and Javon Baker when he was there. So this was a dynamic quarterback, and it just shows what happens when you have no real quarterback. KJ Jefferson was an absolute dud, and it went downhill from there. And you had a little bit out of Dylan Risk, but that was more of the rookie pitcher who comes up to the major leagues like Kerry Wood, strikes out 20, and then people start figuring him out. Well, that's what happened to Dylan Risk. He came out, he had an outstanding first start, and then people started figuring him out once they had some game film, and they were able to exploit his weaknesses. Scott Frost is going to have to retool, and he's working on that. You bring in Taven Jackson. It's a whole new team, essentially. UCF really did hit the reset button on this team. And so he and McKenzie Milton, they got the work cut out for him. And that's why they're working so hard at freshman recruiting this year to bring in the goal is 2 guys, unless the roster changes and there could be a potential 3rd in play. But the goal is 2 to bring in and like Kane Archer, who you've spoken to, about life, the universe, and everything, and about building into Scott Frost's system. So right now it's kind of patchwork. It's kind of just dealing with what you can deal with. He had a shortened recruiting time. Didn't have a full cycle to work with. Well, now next season he's going to have a full cycle. There's a whole new game in the NIL space in place with the the House settlement officially starts Tuesday. We are on the cusp of the world of college football starting a dynamic shift. Now, there's still work to be done, but it's a huge change. UCF was ahead of the curve. A lot of people were getting nervous because UCF was honing in on dropping off the collectives to focus on everything in-house. Well, everyone's starting to, is going to start leaning towards that at different paces. UCF went in gung-ho first, and now they're actually well positioned to handle this. You talk about the $20.5 million that cap that's currently there, with part of it being set aside for new scholarships, but they've got a plan in place because they leaned heavily into this. So I think the administration as a whole and the football staff have a game plan in mind to retool this roster, and they're going to start, while this year is kind of a transition year, they're going to really lean heavily into that freshman class.
This is a fascinating conversation, one that will continue, I'm sure. But I do want to make some quick points here about that composite talent ranking versus where teams landed last year. I mentioned the BYU. According to 247, they were the least talented team in the Big 12 last year, with a talent score in terms of points of 602.46. They had 70 commits. Arizona State, who won the entire Big 12, but was picked to finish last, were the second most talented team in the conference, according to 247. UCF was ranked fifth in the conference, and they finished at the bottom. Utah, who I believe was picked to win the Big 12 last year, had the fourth most talented team. Colorado, with Dion cleaning the entire roster, essentially saying, hey, get your bags and get out of here. When he came in, he essentially replaced his whole team through the portal, had the third most talented team. Teams like Baylor came in at 7, Texas Tech came in at 6. We know they spend a ton of money in the portal. I can't wait to see them re-rank this thing. Iowa State came in at 15. Kansas State came in at 13. These are teams that we're talking about that are being picked to lead the way for the Big 12 headed into the 2025 season. Now, on a segment you and I did last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, I talked about how I felt the Big 12 has the potential for a ton of parity. It's a wide open conference. There are a lot of teams that can come in there and get their share of the pie and do what Arizona State did. I think these composite talent rankings say that when you look at where teams are versus what they were able to accomplish. And I think that it points to a lot of elite coaching that coaches are able to take what may not be viewed as the most talented team and go out and win the conference or compete for national titles. So the Big 12 is on the rise as a Power 4 conference. I think this proves it. UCF has got to get in there, man, and they've got to get their slice of the pie. They got a recent commit this month that might help them get that bigger slice of the pie. We'll talk about him right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with the friends or family? Andrew, I know you have, because you're always telling me when you're going to ball games. Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time, guys. Kaj Baker is a UCF Knight. He committed to the Knights earlier this month. I believe it was June the 2nd when he made the best decision of his young life. I'm sorry, June the 8th, to become a UCF Knight. The young man plays running back in high school, but they're looking at him as possibly a slot receiver. Our guy Brandon Hellwig over at 247 Sports, great work. I encourage everybody listening just to go read his work. Has him clocked at possibly a 4.2 40-yard dash. He also has been clocked around the 4.3 areas. Look, Brandon is with rivals, by the way. don't want to confuse people there. Hey, you go over to 247, you're like, oh, it's Brandon. But he's fast. He's the type of athlete that if you're Scott Frost, you want in this system. They may be creative in how they use them. But I like Kaj Baker a lot. And the scouts are starting to catch on to him. I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody come in here and try to pluck Kaj out here at the last minute, but he is firmly committed to the UCF Knights right now.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You talked about tickets. Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. I did exactly all of that this past week.
I knew you did.
Was on the road, went to a Cleveland Guardians game, set up a group, utilized getting group tickets together and had money for food and merch. Just saying, the system works. But you talk about Kaj Baker. In Scott Frost's first run, there was this guy by the name of Adrian Killens, and I say that very, very kind of matter of fact, and it's to kind of downplay. He kind of fell through the cracks. Wasn't a big guy. wasn't, he was a speedster, and Frost put him in a position where he played running back. He lined up and was used as a wideout. Josh Heupel, utilized him all over the field, and he blossomed at UCF. And I see Kaj Baker as another version of Adrian Killens, a small guy, 5'7", $158. We're not talking, not a big guy, but you know what? There is value in being undersized. You can get underneath, tackles and squeeze your way through the hole. But also, if you got that kind of speed, you get to the outside and you turn on the jets. And while UCF has tried to use that with, they tried that with, Xavier Townsend and Johnny Richardson, no one matched what Adrian Killens was able to do at UCF. And he had a full career with the Knights, he start to finish, and did a great job. I could see Baker being used in a similar way. The blueprint is there. It's already been designed. And as we've talked multiple times, now it's about getting the right pieces in place. And you start that by recruiting in the freshman class. And that's what he's doing for 2026. I think Baker, is an outstanding pick. He's a 3-star guy, on 247. And I think there's a lot of potential there. And I just want to throw out there, because they're both friends of mine. They do great work, because it's easy to get mixed up between websites because it happens. Brandon does great work at Rivals. Steven Leonard does great work at 247. Follow them both. It's worth it. You get a lot of good information from them. They know how to hit that recruiting trail. And I've been following their work for each of them for years. I got to give them both shout outs, because doing this high school recruiting stuff day in and day out, that's tough work. I mean,
it's a grind.
Brian does that stuff, and he's recognized. Obviously he knows the grind. He lives the grind. This tough stuff. So I got to give them a quick shout out just because they're doing amazing work. But get back to Baker,
Andrew,
I got good stuff there.
Let me interject a point here. The comparison to Adrian Killens is interesting, and I think on point to me, because he was a sneaky good receiver as well too, right? Like he could catch the ball. I say receiver, but he could catch the ball out of the backfield. During his career, I think something like 70 catches, almost 900 yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. He was a weapon. And with Scott Frost thinking about using Kaj Baker as a slot receiver, I mean, it speaks to the versatility, the hands. You can accomplish a lot at the college level if you are open to doing different things. When you come in and a coach sees your talent and says, "Hey, you'll be really successful if you learn how to run routes and are willing to catch the ball out of the backfield, or maybe get used at slot receiver, and we can work you in on the field." He's an athlete. Kaj Baker is just an athlete, and all the things you can teach him, the thing you can't teach is 4.2 speed. Andrew, that's something you have or you don't have. And so if he's got 4.2 speed as a foundational base for them to work with, I got to believe that they're going to find a way to make this young man a star during his time at UCF.
Oh, absolutely. And not only as a slot receiver or running back, but as a potential, return man, kick returns, there's potential there. I mean, Adrian Killens cut his teeth, kicking on, returning kickoffs early on in his career. I remember, seeing him do some damage there. There's no reason why, with the running back room UCF currently has, that, a guy like Baker, can't be used as a return man as well. As again, you can't teach speed. You can teach how to read and the vision and improve the decision making. But that physical aspect, either you got it or you don't. The only thing you can do is try to hone in on what's already there. So if he's got 4.2, 4.3 speed, you hone in on that and you utilize it.
Absolutely. Kaj Baker, you are a UCF tonight, but is this the prototypical football player for Scott Frost's system? Is it the best fit? We'll talk about that to close our show next on Locked on UCF. Is an athlete like Kaj Baker the prototypical fit? Now, I think 4.2 speed is a fit for anybody's system, certainly. But you mentioned he's kind of a smaller guy, but you can do a lot. He's got a low center of gravity. I watched a little bit of his film. He's okay running between the tackles. Talk to me about what the prototypical athlete looks like in Scott Frost's system, because Gus liked his linemen early on in his career, faster and more nimble and able to move. And as athletes continue to develop, the advent of sports nutrition is something I talk about all the time, is producing freak athletes at the high school level. These kids are getting bigger, Andrew, and they're not slowing down. They're getting faster at the same time too somehow. They can lift more, they can run longer, they can just do more with the resources they have available and the knowledge they have available to them. And if you're the type of young person who will take that knowledge and apply it to your training process, you got a chance to be really special. What does a prototypical athlete look like in Scott Frost's system? Because I'm not so sure what Gus wanted his lines to look like held up over the years as the game evolved, and then he had issues fielding competitive, skilled, healthy O-lines.
Yeah, I think part of the problem was eventually he just had to start patching it every year with the portal, and that's not the way to do things. You need to build a degree of continuity with development internally to be able to have that winning team, that winning culture. If it becomes purely transient with guys coming in, playing for a year or two, and then going, it's not going to flow to us, especially offensive line where chemistry is everything. If you're out of sync, you're only as good as your worst player. And if you're out of sync, you exploit that guy, and you can just completely muck up a very talented offense. The thing is, with Scott Frost, you need a guy who can be conditioned. Scott Frost plays tempo. That's his bread and butter. So you need a guy who can handle moving quick and not subbing out. You need a guy who's light on his feet. As we know, there's two styles of blocking. There's run blocking, there's pass blocking. Pass blocking, more agility based. It's more being, light on your feet, being able to pop and be able to, step back, create that pocket, and for lack of a better term, hold the line. Running block, it's about explosiveness. That's pure strength. It's also about leverage. Get in underneath those shoulder pads, push the defender up, and make them lose their balance and center of gravity. So you need a guy who has the agility to be able to handle that passing situation, because UCF's offense under Scott Frost utilized the run a lot, but it was closer to 50, 60, 40 range because it would open up those deep passing lanes, and you need to exploit those opportunities. So you need an offensive line that can pass block to take advantage of those opportunities, because obviously those open receivers are not going to be open every single play. So you run a couple times, you draw those defensive backs in a little bit, you make them cheat a little bit to try to be honest, and then you do a double move up over the top. But if you don't give the quarterback enough time to let that play develop, then it's all for naught. So I think as far as in the offensive line, you need a guy who's got really good agility for pass blocking, the conditioning to handle the tempo, and also the mental aspect of it, so that they don't lose track of snap counts and stuff like that. Because part of tempo is, it's tempo. It's speed, but it's also a pattern. There's a pattern to it. I remember a game, Scott Frost wasn't coaching, but Matt Lee was playing center and had 3 false starts in a row. Part of that was because the defenders were barking out line cadences to kind of throw him off. But still, the lack of it's the momentum. If you hit that bump and you kind of fall off, you get distracted, get in your own head and start making these mistakes. You need offensive linemen that have that mental fortitude to be able to keep that pattern of continuity in the snap count going, so that you don't kill momentum with unforced errors.
Yeah, it's in this system. They need to be more. I did an episode earlier talking about this playing with discipline and how UCF will be more disciplined under Scott Frost. When you look at a lot of the areas that they came up short, Andrew, it just it just smelled like undisciplined football. When you mentioned unforced errors there, and so as you try to reset the culture and you bring in guys like Kaj Baker, right? I did a segment on I want to make sure I say his name right. Al-Hassan Idrisu, I believe is how you say this young man's name.
Yeah, I'm from Ohio. Don't ask me to pronounce anything.
So if that's not it, I'll make sure I get it right. I want to pay these guys the proper respect by pronouncing their names correctly. But, he's the highest rated commit so far that they have, the 4-star tackle. But, when you look at these guys that they're bringing in and you think, all right, now we've got a better base of talent to start with. And if we can get them, to absorb the mental side of what we're wanting them to do, if they get in their playbooks, if they understand the assignments, they can play faster and they can use their God-given talent a little better than the guys that they're going to be going up against every Saturday. That's how I think that you find a team that has a composite talent ranking lower than UCF, that finishes higher than UCF. Their players are absorbing more, they're understanding more, they're playing within the system better than UCF's players. And that's got to be the goal if you're Scott Frost. It's not just about stars. It's going to be about fit. It's going to be about filling needs. So like you said, you go out, you get all the talent in the world, but you forget to recruit quarterback, and then suddenly you don't have anybody to run your system. Now, while all the pieces around him are great, if you don't have your guy at quarterback, you could have a surprisingly talented team, Andrew, with still a very low floor. So for UCF, the floor can't be 4-8. It just can't be. It is unacceptable for a school like UCF with, in the class that they're in. You fought to be in a Power 5, Power 4 conference for this reason, because you understand that the ceiling should be championships, especially when you play like they did in 2017. But the floor can't be 4-8, and I think that's what separates some of the good teams in college football from the great teams, is that they have a floor much higher than under 500. So hopefully they'll get there. Again, we'll continue to cover this as we get closer to fall camp. Big 12 Media Days is coming up here pretty soon. We'll cover that as well. A great conversation, Andrew, as always. When we come back next week, we'll dig in more with who UCF has on that commit list. It's going to be fun, I think, covering these guys and seeing where they can land in recruiting by the end of the cycle. That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you so much for making us your first listener every single day. For your second listen, go check out the Portal Show. Our guy Brian Smith has the latest rumors, signings, portal entries. You can be the most informed fan by listening to the Portal Show, because they got all the rapid changes in college football and that landscape covered. You can find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.